The shrill ring of Sandra Morgan's doorbell pierced the Saturday morning calm, followed by 3 aggressive knocks that made the doorframe rattle. Sandra set down her coffee mug with a sigh, already knowing who stood on her doorstep at 7:30 a.m. "Mrs. Morgan, this is a violation notice." Karen Winters thrust a pink slip of paper forward before Sandra could even offer a greeting. "Your pool demolition project has not been approved by the Architectural Committee." Sandra gripped the doorframe, her knuckles whitening. "Karen, we discussed this at the last meeting. The committee approved it 3 weeks ago. While the shade of concrete you selected is unacceptable." Karen gestured dramatically toward the backyard where workers had already begun breaking down the old, cracked pool that had been a money pit for years. "It's morning dove gray when our bylaws clearly state all concrete work must be silver mist or classic stone." Karen Winters was the embodiment of Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association in human form. At 52, she'd served as HOA president for 8 consecutive years, running unopposed because no one else wanted to deal with the mountain of petty complaints she seemed to thrive on. Her blonde highlighted bob never moved an inch, even in the worst weather, and her collection of pastel cardigans rivaled any department store. The contractor already ordered the concrete, Karen. The color difference is barely noticeable. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules, Sandra. You'll need to resubmit your application and postpone the work until next month's meeting." A truck engine roared to life in the driveway, and Sandra glanced over to see the workers preparing to unload supplies. She waited months for this contractor, paid a deposit, and taken time off work to supervise the project. "This is ridiculous. I'm not stopping the work." Sandra crossed her arms firmly. "Then you leave me no choice." Karen pulled out her phone, her acrylic nails clicking against the screen. "I'll be calling a special emergency meeting of the board this afternoon, and we'll be issuing a cease and desist. You'll also be fined $100 per day until the work stops." "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You know, if people could just follow simple rules, my job would be so much easier." Karen's voice took on the martyred tone she often used at HOA meetings. "I don't make the rules, I just enforce them." Sandra bit her tongue, knowing full well that Karen had personally written or revised most of the 47 pages of Oakwood Estates bylaws over her tenure. "And another thing," Karen continued, peering around Sandra into the house. "Your garbage can was still visible from the street yesterday evening, and your rose bushes are 2 inches taller than the maximum allowed height. That'll be on next month's violations summary." From down the street, Sandra could see her neighbor Tom witnessing the exchange with sympathy. He raised his newspaper in silent solidarity, having been on the receiving end of Karen's rule enforcement just last month over a bird feeder deemed architecturally inconsistent. Sandra took a deep breath. 8 years of this woman's tyranny had been enough. Something in her snapped. "You know what, Karen? This time you've gone too far." Sandra stepped onto the porch, closing her front door behind her. "The pool work continues today. You want to call an emergency meeting? Go ahead. But this time, I'll be ready for you." Karen's eyes widened, clearly not used to resistance. This was going to be the beginning of a neighborhood showdown that had been brewing for years. Karen stalked back to her immaculate colonial-style home, phone already pressed to her ear as she speed-dialed the other board members. By noon, texts and emails had flooded the neighborhood's group chat about an emergency meeting at the community clubhouse at 3 o'clock sharp. Sandra spent the morning gathering ammunition. She pulled out every HOA document, approval letter, and email exchange from the past year, arranging them meticulously in a binder. Tom from across the street texted her. "Heard about the showdown. Need backup." "Absolutely," Sandra replied. "Bring anyone else who's tired of Karen's reign." At 2:45, Sandra pulled into the clubhouse parking lot, surprised to see nearly 20 cars already there. Inside, residents filled the folding chairs that had been hastily arranged. Karen stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation titled "Maintaining Property Values Through Proper Procedure" already projected on the wall. "Well, look who decided to show up," Karen announced as Sandra entered. The pool violator herself. Sandra took a seat in the front row, placing her binder on her lap. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Karen." Karen cleared her throat. "As you all know, we're facing a serious breach of protocol in our community. Mrs. Morgan has decided that the rules we all agree to follow don't apply to her." She clicked to a slide showing Sandra's backyard from an angle that could only have been taken by someone standing on a stepladder peering over the fence. "Did you trespass to take that photo?" Sandra asked quietly. Karen ignored the question. "As you can see, the concrete color clearly violates Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our bylaws." Richard Martinez, a retired attorney who rarely attended meetings, raised his hand. "Point of order, Karen. I'm looking at the bylaws right now, and Section 12 only addresses fence heights. Pool regulations are in Section 17, and there's nothing about concrete colors there." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, it's implied in the General Aesthetics Clause. Nothing is implied in a legal document, Richard countered. It's either there or it isn't. Other residents began flipping through their copies of the bylaws, murmuring as they realized Richard was correct. That's beside the point, Karen said, her voice rising slightly. The architectural committee didn't approve the shade of concrete. Sandra stood, opening her binder. Actually, they did. Right here, dated 3 weeks ago, signed by all 3 committee members, including you, Karen. She held up the approval form with Karen's distinct signature at the bottom. Karen's face flushed. Well, I clearly didn't realize what I was signing. The committee needs to reconvene. Tom stood up from the back row. Karen, this is getting ridiculous. You've been doing this to all of us for years. My bird feeder, Janet's mailbox, Mike's vegetable garden, you find violations where none exist. Others nodded in agreement, and suddenly the room felt charged with 8 years of pent-up frustration. I'm just trying to maintain our property values, Karen insisted, her voice taking on the wounded tone she used when challenged. Someone has to care about standards around here. Standards are one thing, said Eleanor, an elderly resident who rarely spoke up. Harassment is another. Last month you measured my grass with a ruler while I was at my husband's funeral. A shocked murmur ran through the room. That's an exaggeration, Karen stammered. I have it on my security camera, Eleanor replied quietly. Karen glanced around the room, suddenly realizing she had lost control of the narrative. Her fingers tightened around her laser pointer until her knuckles turned white. Fine. If you all want to live in a neighborhood where people can do whatever they want, don't come crying to me when your property values plummet. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. The board will still need to vote on Sandra's violation. Alex Chen, the treasurer, cleared his throat. Actually, I move that we vote right now on whether there is a violation at all. Seconded, called several voices at once. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. That's not on the agenda. I move to amend the agenda, Alex continued calmly. All in favor, Richard called out. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously as she surveyed the room. This isn't over, she hissed, just loud enough for Sandra to hear. The emergency meeting ended with a resounding vote in Sandra's favor. Karen stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door hard enough to rattle the community bulletin board. Sandra's pool removal project could continue without interference, at least officially. But everyone knew Karen Winters wasn't one to accept defeat gracefully. The next morning, Sandra watched from her kitchen window as the construction crew returned to continue their work. The foreman, Dave, had barely fired up his equipment when Karen's silver SUV screeched to a halt in front of Sandra's house. Here we go, Sandra muttered, stepping outside to intercept Karen before she could harass the workers. Karen marched up the driveway, a city official-looking document clutched in her manicured hand. I filed a noise complaint with the city. You didn't get a proper noise permit for construction. Sandra crossed her arms. Actually, Dave filed for that last week. It's posted right there on the fence. Karen barely glanced at the permit. Well, I've also reported your contractors for parking violations. Their truck is blocking part of the sidewalk. Dave overheard and immediately moved his vehicle, though it had been barely overlapping the walkway by inches. Problem solved, Sandra said with forced pleasantness. Anything else? Karen's eyes narrowed as she scanned the property for another violation. Your contractor hasn't put up proper dust barriers. That's a health hazard to the neighborhood. Dave approached, wiping his hands on his jeans. Ma'am, we're following all city ordinances. The dust control measures are in place. He gestured to the sprinklers and tarps his team had already set up. Not adequate, Karen snapped. I have asthma, and this could trigger an attack. Sandra noticed Karen's Mercedes wasn't in her driveway. Aren't you supposed to be at work, Karen? I took the day off to protect our community, Karen replied, chin lifting proudly. Someone has to stand up for the rules. By lunchtime, Karen had called the city inspector, who visited the site and found everything in order. Undeterred, she then parked her car directly across from Sandra's house, taking photos every time a worker moved equipment. The workers exchanged knowing glances but continued professionally. Dave approached Sandra during their lunch break. We've dealt with avoid types before. Don't worry about us. We know the regulations inside and out. Sandra nodded gratefully. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. Just another day in construction, Dave chuckled, though she's definitely one of the more persistent ones I've seen. After lunch, Karen switched tactics. She began walking her dog past Sandra's house every 15 minutes, stopping to document violations with her phone camera. On her third pass, she approached a young worker carrying materials. Excuse me, but are you licensed to handle that equipment? Karen demanded loudly. The worker, barely 20 years old, looked startled. Yes, ma'am. I'll need to see proof. If you can't provide it, I'll have to report you to the labor board. Sandra had been watching from her porch and stepped in. Karen, that's enough. You're interfering with their work and harassing my contractors. I'm merely ensuring proper credentials, Karen replied sweetly, for everyone's safety. You're trespassing on my property, Sandra countered. I'm on the sidewalk, which is public property, Karen said, taking a deliberate step back. By mid-afternoon, tensions had risen further. Karen had recruited 2 of her loyal HOA committee members to join her surveillance operation. They sat in lawn chairs at the edge of Sandra's property, clipboards in hand, documenting every move of the construction crew. Tom noticed the spectacle while retrieving his mail and immediately texted Sandra. Reinforcements needed. Karen's enlisted her minions. Before Sandra could reply, a concrete truck arrived to begin pouring the base where the pool had been removed. Karen immediately jumped up, waving her arms frantically. Stop. Stop right now. That's the wrong shade of concrete. The truck driver looked bewildered as Karen rushed toward him, waving a color sample card in his face. Ma'am, I'm just delivering what was ordered, he said, backing away. Well, it's unauthorized. I'm the HOA president, and I forbid you to pour that concrete. The situation had finally reached its breaking point. Sandra pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been hoping to avoid. 20 minutes after Sandra's call, a police cruiser pulled up in front of her house. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, adjusting his belt as he surveyed the scene. Karen and her 2 HOA allies blocking the concrete truck, the construction crew standing awkwardly to the side, and neighbors peering from windows and porches at the unfolding drama. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Rodriguez asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Karen immediately rushed toward him. Officer, thank goodness you're here. These people are violating HOA regulations with unauthorized construction. I need you to shut this down immediately. Officer Rodriguez turned to Sandra. Ma'am, is this your property? Yes, officer. I'm Sandra Morgan. I called because this woman is harassing my contractors and trespassing on my property after being repeatedly asked to leave. The officer nodded. And you have permits for this work. All city permits are in order and posted on the fence, Sandra explained, pointing to the documentation. The HOA also approved the project 3 weeks ago. We had an emergency meeting yesterday where the board voted again to approve it. Karen interrupted, but the concrete color is. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez held up his hand. Let me speak with the homeowner first. He turned back to Sandra. So you're saying this woman is interfering with contracted work on your property? Yes, she's been here all day harassing my workers, taking photos, making false complaints to the city, and now physically blocking equipment from entering my property. The officer turned to Karen. Ma'am, are you a city official or building inspector? No, I'm the president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, Karen replied, standing taller. And it's my dubito. Ma'am, HOA regulations are civil matters, not criminal ones. The police don't enforce HOA rules. Officer Rodriguez's tone remained professional but firm. If you believe there's a violation of your HOA agreement, you need to handle that through your association's procedures, not by obstructing work or harassing contractors. But I already tried that. The meeting yesterday was a sham. They all ganged up on me. Karen's voice rose shrilly. So your association voted to approve this work? The officer clarified. Yes, but they didn't understand what they were voting for. Karen insisted, color rising in her cheeks. Officer Rodriguez sighed slightly. Ma'am, I need to ask you and your associates to move off this property. You're on private property without the owner's permission. The HOA bylaws give me the right to inspect. No, ma'am, they don't, came a voice from behind them. Everyone turned to see Richard Martinez, the retired attorney, walking up with a copy of the HOA bylaws in hand. I highlighted the relevant sections. HOA officers may request to inspect properties with 48 hours written notice and only with the homeowner's permission or a court order. Karen snatched the document from Richard's hands, scanning it frantically. This is a new version. Someone changed it. That's the version you yourself distributed last year, Karen, Richard replied calmly. Page 23, Section 4, Paragraph B. Officer Rodriguez looked at Karen. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you once more to leave this property and stop interfering with these workers. This is outrageous. Karen's voice cracked with frustration. I've given 8 years of my life to this neighborhood. I've maintained property values, I've kept out the riffraff, and this is how I'm repaid. Sandra stepped forward. Karen, this isn't about your service to the community. It's about you overstepping boundaries. Please just let me fix my backyard in peace. Karen's face contorted with rage. You won't get away with this. She turned to her 2 supporters. Patricia, Gerald, we need to document everything. Take pictures of that concrete. As Patricia raised her phone to snap another photo, Officer Rodriguez stepped between them. Ma'am, I've asked you to leave. If you continue to refuse, I'll have no choice but to consider this criminal trespassing. A tense silence fell over the scene. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance began to edge closer, sensing a pivotal moment in the neighborhood's history. Karen looked around, suddenly aware of the audience that had gathered. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Tom filming the encounter with his phone. "Are you recording this?" she shrieked, lunging toward him. "That's a violation of Section 18. No unauthorized recordings of HOA officials." Officer Rodriguez gently but firmly caught Karen by the arm. "Ma'am, please step back. You're escalating this situation unnecessarily." A collective gasp rose from the gathered neighbors as they saw the pile of pre-written violation notices. Sandra bent down and picked one up dated for next Tuesday, claiming a violation for improper landscaping around pool area, an area that wouldn't even exist once the construction was complete. "Karen, what is this?" Sandra held up the pink slip. "You wrote up violations for problems that don't even exist yet." Karen's face flushed deep crimson. "Those are contingency notices for efficiency purposes." Officer Rodriguez knelt and gathered a few of the papers, reviewing them with a frown. "Ma'am, this appears to be harassment. Pre-writing violations suggests intent to target this homeowner regardless of actual compliance. How many other neighbors have you done this to?" Tom called out from the growing crowd. Patricia and Gerald, Karen's HOA allies, slowly backed away, clearly uncomfortable with this new revelation. "Don't you dare abandon me," Karen hissed at them. "We've worked too hard to maintain standards in this neighborhood." Gerald cleared his throat. "Karen, you told us Sandra was violating clear HOA rules. You never mentioned anything about," well, he gestured at the scattered violation notices, "this." Patricia nodded. "I'm on the architectural committee, and I signed off on this project. I only came today because you said Sandra had changed the plans without approval." Karen's support was crumbling before her eyes. She scrambled to collect the damning pink slips, shoving them haphazardly back into her purse. "This is being blown completely out of proportion." "Is it?" Eleanor, the elderly woman who had spoken up at yesterday's meeting, pushed through the crowd with a large manila envelope. "I've been keeping records for years." She handed the envelope to Officer Rodriguez. "Every unjustified violation notice I've received, with dates and photos proving compliance. I've spoken with other neighbors who've done the same." The officer accepted the envelope but shook his head. "Again, HOA disputes are civil matters. But if there's a pattern of targeted harassment, that could be a different issue." Dave, the construction foreman, checked his watch. "Ms. Morgan, we need to pour this concrete within the hour or reschedule for next month." Sandra turned to Officer Rodriguez. "Officer, can my contractors proceed with their work?" "Yes, ma'am. There's no legal reason they can't continue." He turned to Karen. "And you need to leave this property now. Final warning." Karen stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling. For 8 years, she had ruled Oakwood Estates with an iron fist disguised in a cashmere glove. No one had ever challenged her like this before. "You can't do this," she whispered, then louder. "You can't do this? I am this neighborhood." In a sudden move that shocked everyone, Karen darted toward the concrete truck, snatching a clipboard from the driver's hands. "I'm canceling this delivery," she shouted, scribbling frantically on the form. The driver looked bewildered. "Ma'am, you can't." "Karen." Sandra rushed forward. Officer Rodriguez moved quickly, taking the clipboard from Karen's hands. "Ma'am, that's enough. You're interfering with a business transaction that doesn't involve you." "Everything in Oakwood Estates involves me." Karen's voice had risen to a near shriek. Neighbors were openly recording now, phones held high to capture the meltdown. "Ma'am, please step away from the truck and leave this property," Officer Rodriguez said firmly, "or I will be forced to place you under arrest for criminal trespassing and interference with a business operation." "Arrest?" Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? Do you know who I am?" "My husband plays golf with the police chief." "That's irrelevant to the current situation, ma'am." Karen looked around at the sea of neighbors' faces. Many people she'd cited, fined, and lectured over the years. There was no sympathy to be found. "This neighborhood was perfect before all of you started breaking the rules," she said, voice trembling. "The matching mailboxes, the regulated fence heights, the approved exterior paint colors. It was all perfect." Sandra stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Karen, the neighborhood isn't a display home. It's where people live their lives. My broken pool was a safety hazard for my kids. I'm fixing it properly, with all the right approvals. Please just let us be." For a moment, something flickered in Karen's eyes, perhaps recognition of how far she had gone. Then it hardened again. "Fine," she spat. "Pour your ugly concrete. But mark my words, this isn't over. The next board meeting is in 2 weeks, and we'll see who has the last word then." With that, Karen snatched up her purse, spun on her heel, and marched away, her cardigan fluttering in the breeze like a battle flag. As Karen's silver SUV screeched away from the curb, the tension in the air seemed to dissolve. Neighbors who had been strangers despite living feet away from each other for years began introducing themselves, united by the shared experience they just witnessed. Officer Rodriguez stayed long enough to ensure the concrete truck could access the property without further incident. "If she returns today and causes more trouble, don't hesitate to call again," he told Sandra before leaving. The concrete pour went smoothly after that, and by evening, the foundation of Sandra's new backyard patio was taking shape where the cracked, leaking pool had once been. Dave and his crew worked efficiently, making up for lost time. "We'll be back tomorrow to finish up," Dave said as they packed their equipment. "Should be less eventful, I hope." Sandra laughed wearily. One can only hope. That night, the Oakwood Estates community chat exploded with activity. Videos of Karen's meltdown circulated, along with years of stored grievances and complaints about her reign as HOA president. "Remember when she measured my Christmas lights with a ruler to ensure they were exactly the same distance apart?" wrote one neighbor. "She gave me a violation for having a non-approved welcome mat. It was solid brown," added another. Tom created a separate group chat titled HOA Reform Committee that quickly grew to include 27 households, more than half the neighborhood. They arranged to meet the following evening at Sandra's house to discuss changes they wanted to propose at the upcoming board meeting. The next morning, Sandra woke to find her front yard dotted with small signs reading, "I stand with Sandra" and "Reform the HOA." The neighborhood had rallied overnight. Dave and his crew arrived early, clearly eager to complete the job without another Karen confrontation. Sandra brought them coffee and pastries, grateful for their professionalism despite yesterday's chaos. By mid-morning, there was still no sign of Karen, though several neighbors reported seeing lights on in her house throughout the night. Patricia, one of Karen's former allies, approached Sandra as she watched the construction progress. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said, fidgeting with her gardening gloves. "I never realized how obsessive Karen had become. She always framed it as protecting our investments and neighborhood character." Sandra nodded. "I think she started with good intentions, but somewhere along the line, power corrupted," Patricia finished. "Absolutely. Anyway, I've resigned from the architectural committee. I can't be part of that system anymore." As the day progressed, more neighbors stopped by, some helping to clear debris, others bringing refreshments for the workers. The mood was almost festive, like a community barrier had finally broken down. Around 3 o'clock, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into Karen's driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged. Robert Winters, Karen's husband, rarely seen at neighborhood functions due to his demanding job as a corporate attorney. He walked directly to Sandra's house, his expression grim but composed. The construction crew paused their work, watching warily. "Mrs. Morgan," he said formally, "I understand there was an incident yesterday involving my wife." Sandra straightened her shoulders. "Yes, Mr. Winters, there was." Robert nodded, his face unreadable. "I've reviewed the video footage that's been circulating. I want to extend my personal apology for my wife's behavior. This was not what Sandra had expected. I thank you." Karen hesitated, choosing his words carefully, passionate about maintaining standards. "But she crossed several lines yesterday, both ethical and legal. We've had a long discussion about it." Tom approached, standing supportively beside Sandra. "Is she planning to attend the board meeting next week?" Robert's expression tightened slightly. "No. Karen has decided to resign as HOA president, effective immediately. She's drafting the email now." A stunned silence fell over the gathered neighbors. "That's unexpected," Sandra finally managed. "Karen has been under considerable stress lately," Robert continued, his attorney's demeanor never slipping. "Her mother's health is declining, and there have been issues at her workplace. This doesn't excuse her behavior, but perhaps helps explain it." Sandra nodded, surprising herself with the sympathy she felt. Karen, for all her flaws, was still a human being with her own struggles. "Please understand," Robert added, lowering his voice, "this neighborhood has been Karen's project for years. Perhaps too much so. We'll be taking some time away once this is all settled. A vacation, possibly an extended one." As Robert turned to leave, he paused, "And Mrs. Morgan, that patio looks like it's going to be quite nice. The color is perfectly acceptable." News of Karen's resignation spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire. By evening, every household had received her official email. A tersely worded 3-paragraph statement citing personal reasons for her departure and a brief summary of her accomplishments during her tenure. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of yesterday's events, just a notification that Vice President Alex Chen would assume leadership until the next election. The HOA Reform Committee meeting at Sandra's house that evening had evolved into something closer to a block party. Neighbors spilled from the living room onto the newly poured concrete patio, which was roped off but provided a perfect visual backdrop for their discussions. "I've lived here 6 years and never knew half of you," Janet Miller said, balancing a paper plate of potluck contributions. Karen had us also afraid of violating some obscure rule that we stopped having each other over. Richard Martinez, the retired attorney, had arrived with a legal pad full of proposed bylaw changes. The fundamental problem, he explained to the gathered group, is that our HOA rules became excessive under Karen's leadership. We started with 10 pages of reasonable guidelines and now have 47 pages of micromanagement. Alex Chen, the new acting president, nodded in agreement. I've been reviewing our financial records too. Did you know we spent over $30,000 in the past 2 years on enforcement measures? That includes printing those ping violation notices, hiring seasonal inspectors, and legal consults for threatened lawsuits. A chorus of disbelief echoed through the group. That money could have gone to improving the playground equipment or finally fixing the clubhouse roof, Tom pointed out. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, the meeting shifted from complaints to constructive planning. Committees formed to address different aspects of HOA reform, bylaw revision, budget realignment, community engagement, and architectural guidelines simplification. Sandra watched in amazement as neighbors exchanged phone numbers, compared gardening tips, and made plans for carpooling. The entire atmosphere of Oakwood Estates seemed to be transforming overnight. Around 9 o'clock, as the gathering was winding down, Sandra noticed movement across the street. Karen stood at her living room window, curtain partially drawn back, watching the community meeting in progress. Their eyes met briefly before Karen dropped the curtain back into place. Despite everything, Sandra felt a twinge of sympathy. Being at the center of a community was clearly important to Karen. She had just found entirely the wrong way to go about it. The next morning, Saturday, Sandra woke early to check on the patio's progress. Dave had promised to return for final finishing touches. As she sipped her coffee on the front porch, she noticed Karen's front door open. Karen emerged, not in her usual cardigan and pressed slacks, but in casual jeans and a simple blouse. She hesitated at the end of her driveway, then squared her shoulders and walked directly towards Sandra's house. Sandra tensed, preparing for another confrontation, but Karen's demeanor was different, subdued, almost uncertain. "Good morning," Sandra offered cautiously when Karen reached the edge of her yard. "Morning," Karen replied, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. She looked at the ground, then back at Sandra. "Your patio looks nice." Coming from Karen, this was equivalent to effusive praise. "Thank you," Sandra said, surprised. Dave did a great job, especially considering the interruptions. Karen winced slightly at the reference. She took a deep breath. "Robert says I owe you a proper apology." "He's right." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I'm sorry for my behavior. It was inappropriate and excessive." The apology was clearly difficult for her, but it seemed genuine. "I appreciate that, Karen," Sandra said carefully. "I've been president for so long that I started to think of Oakwood Estates as mine." Karen looked around at the quiet morning street. Every violation felt personal, like someone was deliberately undermining my work. Sandra nodded, understanding dawning. "It's hard to separate yourself from something you care about. Robert and I are leaving for a month," Karen continued. "His family has a lake house in Mick,